7 on the book Unbroken by Laura Hillenbrand. Chapter 7. This is it, comma, boys. Oahu was still ringing from the Pearl Harbor attack. The roads were pocked with bomb craters. The island was on constant alert for attack or invasion, and so camouflaged, a serviceman wrote. One sees only about one-third of what is actually there. At night, it disappeared. Every window had a light-proof curtains. Every car had covered headlights, and blackout patrols forbade even the striking of a match. Servicemen wore gas masks in hip holsters. Surfers had to warm like WORM under barbed wire running along Waikiki Beach. At Kahuku Air Base in Oahu's North Shore, Louis and Phil were assigned to a barracks with Mitchell, Mosnet, 12 other officers, and hordes of mosquitoes. You kill one, Phil wrote, and 10 more come to the funeral. The barracks, Phil added, look like a dozen dirty Missouri pigs have been wallowing on it. The non-stop revelry didn't help. One night, as Louis and Phil wrestled over a beer, they plowed down 3 wall partitions. When William Matheny, their colonel, saw the wreckage, he grumbled that Zamperini must have been involved. Everyone was eager to fight, but there was no combat. In its place was sea search, SEA search. Dull, day-long ocean-flying patrols overseen by a lieutenant everyone hated. A nitpicker and rank pooler, he was loathed, Loathed, loathed. It's like you hate it. He was loathed thanks to an incident in which one of Superman's engines quit in mid-flight. When Phil returned the plane to base, the furious lieutenant ordered them back up. When Louis offered to fly on 3 engines if the lieutenant joined them, the lieutenant abruptly changed his mind. The tedium of sea search made practical joking irresistible. When a ground officer complained about airmen's higher pay, the crew invited him to fly the plane. They sat him in the co-pilot's seat while Louis hid under the navigator's table by the yoke control arms. When the officer took the yoke, Louis tugged the chains, making the plane swoop up and down. The officer panicked, Louis smothered laughter, and Phil kept a poker face. The officer quit carping about airmen's pay. Louis's 2 most notorious pranks involved Phil, chewing gum, and their new co-pilot, a massive ex-football player named Charlton Cuppernell, who replaced Mosnet when the latter joined another crew. In the first incident, after Cuppernell and Phil swiped his beer, Louis retaliated by jamming gum into the cockpit urine relief tube. If you say you have integrity, you better have integrity. On the next flight, the call of nature was followed by an inexplicably brimming urine tube, turbulence, and at least 1 wet airman. Louis hid in Honolulu to escape punishment. On another occasion, to get even the Cuppernell and Phil for stealing his gum, Louis replaced it with a laxative variety. Just before a long flight, Cuppernell and Phil each stole 3 pieces, triple the standard dose. As Superman flew, pilot and co-pilot, in great distress, made alternating dashes to the back of the plane, yelling for someone to get a toilet bag. When the bags were used up, Cuppernell dropped his pants and hung his enormous rear out of the window while 4 crewmen clung to him to keep him from falling out. Oh, man. When the ground crews saw the results of the plane's tail, they were furious. It was like an abstract painting, Louis said. That's funny. Louis looked at this incident when they were relieving themselves, number one, out of the back of this plane, and Louis was like, it's like an abstract painting. See, Louis, wow, the perception of this guy, it's amazing. It's a perception. To develop perception, it's like a life-saving skill, seriously. So that's why I wrote my book, Mechanics of Perception, and we'll see who reads it. But a lot of, you don't really actually need to read it. If you just trust God, you're going to get everything you need. But the book, it's a good instruction manual. I think it's good. I think if you're a parent and you have a child, you should at least, I don't know, what do you think? Just write an instruction manual. So, that's kind of what I did. But Phil's boredom remedy was hot dogging. Returning from sea search, he'd buzz Oahu so low he could look straight into the first floor windows of buildings. It was, he said, kind of daring. On their days off, the crew played poker and divvied up Cece's care packages, and Louis and Phil tooled around in the borrowed cars. Along the way, they came upon several airfields and were amazed to discover that all the planes and equipment were made of plywood, an elaborate ruse to fool Japanese flying reconnaissance. One day, this information would be very important. Paradise was the officers' club, where there was beer and pretty girls with 10:30 curfews. When the crew got the squadron's best gunnery scores, Louis pinned officers' insignia to the enlisted men's uniforms and snuck them in. Just after Louis rose to dance with a girl, Colonel Matheny sat down in his place and began talking to the terrified Clarence Douglas, who was pretending to be a second lieutenant. When Louis ran to Douglas's rescue, the unsuspecting colonel got up and told him what a fine man Douglas was. On the dance floor, Louis spotted the hated lieutenant who'd ordered them to fly on 3 engines. He found a bag of flour, recruited a girl, and began dancing near the lieutenant, dropping flour down his collar with each pass. After an hour, the whole club was watching. Louis snagged a glass of water, danced up behind his victim, dumped the water down his shirt, and took off. The lieutenant spun around, his back running with dough. Unable to find the culprit, he stormed out. Coffee. Coffee good. Just before Christmas, the cruise hour finally came. Ordered to fly to Midway Island. Coffee is leverage, so they were greeted with a case of Budweiser and big news. The Japanese had built a base on Wake Atoll in the Pacific War's biggest raid yet. America was going to burn it down. It would be a 16-hour mission nonstop, pushing the B-24s as far as they could go. Even with the auxiliary fuel tanks, they'd be cutting it extremely close. All right, so just before Christmas, as a result of this Pearl Harbor bombing that happened on Hawaii, the crew's final hour came. Okay, they were ordered to fly to Midway Island. They were greeted with a case of beer. And the Japanese had built a base on the Wake Atoll. So this was like a big plan to get to for retribution for Pearl Harbor. So on December 23rd, 1942, 26 B-24s lifted off of the Midway runway. Superman slipped toward the rear. The planes flew through the afternoon and into the night, and Ra was with them. At 11 p.m., Phil switched off the outside lights. Clouds closed in. Wake was very close now, but they couldn't see it in the greenhouse. Louis felt a buzzing in himself and the same sensation he'd felt before races. Ahead, Wake slept. At midnight, Colonel Matheny, piloting the lead plane, broke radio silence. This is it, boys. All right, imagine that. You're flying these planes, and then the colonel, on the radio, he's like, this is it, boys. It's like, whoa. The Department of Integrity. Matheny set his bomber plunging out of the clouds, and there was Wake. He barreled toward a string of buildings, hauled the plane's nose up, and yelled to the bombardier, when are you going to turn loose those incendiaries? Gone, sir. At that instant, the buildings exploded. Ooh, my goodness. It's tricky business doing this justice stuff. Okay, so at that instant, the buildings exploded. Behind Matheny, wave after wave of B-24. Well, it's tricky if you don't trust God. That's really the truth, in my opinion. So B-24s dove at Wake. The Japanese ran for their guns. In Superman, well behind and above the leading planes, Louis saw throbs of light in the clouds. As Phil began the plane's dive, Louis opened the bomb bay doors, flipped his bomb switches, and fixed the settings. The orders were to dive to 4,000 feet, but when the plane reached that altitude, it was still in the clouds. Louis's target was the airstrip. So Louis, he was flying this plane, this bomber. His target was an airstrip. So to take out, obviously, it's war tactics. Obviously, take out bridges, airplane bases, and railways and that kind of stuff. It's, just the way it is. So he flipped his bomb switches and fixed the settings. The orders were to dive to 4,000 feet, but when the plane reached that altitude, it was still in the clouds. Louis' target was the airstrip, but he couldn't see it. Phil pushed the plane lower, moving at terrific speed. At 2,500 feet, Superman speared through the clouds, and Wake stretched out, sudden and brilliant, beneath it. The islands were a blaze of garish light. Everywhere, bombs were striking targets in mushrooms of fire. Searchlights swung about, their beams reflecting off the clouds and back onto the ground, illuminating scores of Japanese in their sleeping clothes, sprinting in confusion. Wow, see? The power of God, guys. See, that was actually when they did this, when the Japanese, or when the American, when the American airplanes, when they did their little act of retribution for Pearl Harbor, it just so happened that it was a cloudy night. And imagine you're dropping bombs on your enemy and it's cloudy. I mean, I would want that because they can't see you up in the air and fight back, if I had to do it. Anyways, war tactics. So as Phil began the plane's dive, the mysteries of weather, it's just like, trust God. That's all. So as Phil began the plane's dive, Louis opened the bomb bay doors, blah, blah, blah. I read all that. Da, 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 da. So the islands were a blaze of, I read it too, illuminating scores of Japanese in their sleeping clothes, sprinting in confusion. Oh my goodness. These poor souls. So to Pillsbury, every gun in the world seemed to be firing skyward. Anti-aircraft guns lobbed shells over the planes where they erupted, sending shrapnel showering down. Tracer bullets, emitting color to allow gunners to see where they were firing, streaked the air in yellow, red, and green. Watching the clamor of colors, Pillsbury thought of Christmas. Then he remembered they crossed the international date line and past midnight. It was Christmas. Phil wrestled Superman out of its dive. Louis spotted the tail light of a Japanese Zero fighter plane rolling down the runway. He aimed for it, very close, something exploded, and Superman rocked. A shell burst by the left wing, another by the tail. Louis loosed a bomb over the sea. War, guys, it's like an old thing. You don't need it. But I would say learn from it. Absolutely learn from it and read about it for sure. Because it's like building blocks of civilization. These people sacrificed their blood, sweat, and tears to do all this, and it's a lesson. And now we move towards pure philosophy and diplomacy and creativity and family and being good-mannered and giving people time to make the right decisions and forgive and say sorry and choose wisely. So, next thing. So a shell burst by the left wing, another by the tail. Louis loosed a bomb over the Zero, then dropped his 5 other bombs over bunkers and parked planes. Relieved of 3,000 pounds of bombs, Superman bobbed upward. Louis yelled, "Bombs away!" And Philly rolled the plane left through streams of anti-aircraft fire. Louis looked down. His bombs landed in splashes of fire on the bunkers and planes. He missed the Zero, but had bull's-eyed the runway. Phil turned Superman back for midway. Wake was a sea of fire and running men. As Superman flew for a home, Louis realized, actually, if I ever start this is just a random thought I had, but if I ever somehow get to monetize my Facebook channel, I have a friend who has a couple of friends, they have their Facebook channel monetized. They make a little money. I'm literally going to give all that money back to whoever my followers are. Dividends and stuff, it's going to get bigger. All my dividends, I'm just going to be giving that all to everything I don't need. I'm giving back to the people. So, and I mean that. So then dropped his 5 other bombs over bunkers and parked planes. Relieved of 3,000 pounds of bombs, Superman bobbed upward. Louis yelled, "Bombs away!" I read that. As Superman flew for home, Louis realized they had a major problem. The bomb bay doors were stuck open. He climbed back and looked. When Phil had That's a problem. That's going to cause significant drag. If your if your doors are open while you're flying a plane, you're going to use a lot more fuel. So he's like, oh my gosh. He climbed back and looked. When Phil had wrenched the plane out of its dive, the auxiliary fuels tanks had slid into the doors. Nothing could be done. With the open bomb bay dragging against the air, Superman would burn right through its fuel. Given that this mission was stretching the plane's range to the limit, it was sobering news. They could do nothing but, that's called drag, okay? When you study aerodynamics, there is a concept called drag. You can look it up. Not too complicated. So, drained, Louis stared at the sky, watching the stars through breaks in the clouds. 75 miles away from Wake, one of the men looked back. He could see the island burning. As day broke, a general stood by the Midway airstrip waiting for his bombers, his face furrowed. Fog hung low over the ocean, spilling rain. For the pilots, finding tiny Midway would be difficult, and there was the question of whether their fuel would last long enough. Excuse me. One plane appeared, then another and another. One by one, they landed all critically low on fuel. Superman wasn't in sight. Out in the fog, Phil must have looked at his fuel gauge and known he was in trouble. With his bomb bay open and wind howling through the fuselage, he dragged away his fuel. He didn't know if he'd find Midway and didn't have enough fuel to fly around searching for it. At last, he spotted the island. At that moment, one of Superman's engines sputtered and died. Oh, I think they had four engines, and one of them he was fine. I don't know, but I think they had four engines on the B-20. They were fine B-24s, but I could be wrong. Phil nursed the plane along, aiming for the runway. The remaining engines kept turning. At touchdown, a second engine died. Oh no. Moments later, the other two engines quit. Are you serious? That sucks. Had the route only been slightly longer, Superman would have hit the ocean. The general came running, smiling. Every plane had made it back. Oh, he made it back, though. Wow. News of the raid broke. The airmen were given medals and lauded as heroes. In the Honolulu Advertiser, Louis found a cartoon depicting his role in the bombing wake. He clipped it out and tucked it in his wallet. The men felt cocky. Uh-oh. See, that is definitely a rule. When do not brag about your winnings. Got to be careful with that. So they did their little raid. They came back. They felt cocky. And Admiral said Japan might be finished within a year. Phil heard men talking about going home. Methinks, he wrote to his mother, it's a little premature. And that's it. Chapter 7. We'll get to chapter 8 in the future.